After taking a break from the channel, I've come to the realization that solely making videos on internet-specific topics is a big part of the reason why I felt so burned out. This isn't to say that I'm never going to talk about internet-specific topics anymore, but sometimes recounting a series of events in chronological order gets boring, and I just want to talk about a game I think is neat. So, to mark the beginning of this new era of the channel, I'm going to talk about a game that's about the internet. As someone who's played like 5 Megaten games, going on 6, I get the impression that this series is basically just a bunch of smaller series stacked on top of each other in a trench coat. To my understanding, you can separate every game in the series into 4 tiers of a trend that's probably not even relevant anymore. Tier 1 consists of Persona 3 to 5 and all the spin-offs specific to those games, as Modern Persona is the most mainstream branch of the series. Tier 2 consists of the post-Nocturne mainline SMTs, which don't reach the sheer popularity of Persona but are still generally recognizable to most RPG enjoyers. And the very bottom is Tier 4, which is exclusively for people who've gotten to such a level of unhinged that they've completely lost sight of what conventionally good game design is. In between Tiers 2 and 4 is Tier 3. That was really hard math, I know, but I majored in accounting, so I was able to do it so you didn't have to. This tier has the various branches of the series that are too niche to be in Tier 1 or 2, but also too actually playable by normal human beings to be in Tier 4. Pre-Yoshino Persona, SMT 1 and 2, Digital Devil Saga, Devil Survivor, the list goes on. Megaten fans who enjoy these games tend to be pretty ride or die about them, shilling them at every opportunity, and also incomprehensibly shouting about how they're peak fiction. Soul Hackers, originally released with the Sega Tasanshiro seal of approval but later ported to the PS1 and later the 3DS, is in this tier of games. It's part of the Devil Summoner series, where it's accompanied by the Raito games, the mediocre sequel that everyone immediately forgot about, and one of the rare games in the series that somehow hasn't gotten a fan translation yet. Having recently gotten into Megaten through 5 and gotten truly hooked by 4, I played through Soul Hackers this January because I wanted something weirder than a mainline title. And I think it does a lot of interesting things that people don't mention enough, which is why I'm making a video about it. Don't think of this as some quote-unquote objective product review or some pretentious video essay about how this is the deepest game ever made, but rather, I just think this game is neat and I want to talk about it. Mechanically, Soul Hackers takes a lot from older Megaten games because guess what? It is an older Megaten game. I'm not going to make a big deal about what mechanics were introduced in which game for the simple reason that I don't feel like making an ass out of myself by talking about games I haven't played yet. Anyways, one of the main things that really stands out to me is the party composition. You have 2 rows of 3 party members consisting of 2 named characters who are permanently locked in there and up to 4 summonable demons of your choosing. One of these rows is in the front and the other is in the back, and only the former can choose close range attacks, so there's an element of strategy to how you build your team to make the most of your 6 slots. This front row back row restriction also applies to enemy formations too, and cleverly exploiting it can be a vital tool for success. As for the 2 party members who you're stuck with for the entire game, they add a lot mechanically. The silent protagonist, whose default codename is that thing that Mick Foley got thrown off of once, completely lacks magic and can only use basic sword and gun attacks. I like this because it gives you the feeling of being a regular human who has to rely on summoning the power of stronger entities, although he's not as weak as he sounds since there's a lot of bonuses you can get through weapons and armor. Nemissa, on the other hand, is a fun party member to use for the complete power trip that she gives you. She's a magic-focused glass cannon who can completely nuke enemies if given the chance. Before you enter a single round of combat, there's a seemingly uneventful dialogue choice that determines which spells she can learn, and you're going to want to go for the electric build because it allows her to absolutely tear through bosses. The meta for boss fights in this game is setting up buffs and debuffs with your other demons and then having Nemissa spam electric attacks so you can look at the big numbers. I've additionally heard that her Necroma spell, which she gets in all 3 builds, can completely break the game if exploited correctly, although I've never really messed around with it in my playthrough, so I can't really confirm or deny this. As for the standard demons, you have less freedom in how you can build them in comparison to the newer Megaten games, to the point where they can't even level up. Now, I like building the most overpowered demons possible, and I'm expecting not being able to do so to be a turnoff for people more familiar with newer Megatens, but the limited nature of Soul Hackers' demons has its own advantages. It keeps you from getting too complacent, as you're inherently going to have to fuse more often due to not being able to coast by with a level advantage. Unpopular opinion and scorching hot take, but it's possible to like 2 drastically different gameplay approaches instead of thinking everything should conform to one homogeneous format. Another thing that differentiates Soul Hackers and other older Megatens from the newer ones is Magnetite, which is a resource that you collect through winning battles. You spend it every time you summon a demon or take a step with a demon in your party, and that might seem annoying to deal with, but at least in Soul Hackers it really isn't. It's such an abundant resource that you'll never have to worry about running out of it, to the point where most guides list it as the most efficient thing to give away during demon negotiations because it's just that plentiful. However, the main mechanics that set Soul Hackers and its predecessor apart from the rest of Megaten, including the rest of the older games, are the various ones related to demon party members. Demons have their own innate alignments that affect party composition, and extreme loss/chaos demons have the biggest impact. If you have an extreme chaos demon in your party, your law demons will have to stay unsummoned and vice versa. One of the highlights of my playthrough was when a law demon I was fighting got low in health and begged to join my party. But since said party had 2 extreme chaos demons in it, I rejected their offer and killed them. If you don't care for this feature, the 3DS version lets you turn it off, but I like the implications it has on party building enough to keep it on. The most polarizing mechanic in Soul Hackers though is demon personality. Basically, there's a meter that determines how much a demon in your party likes you. Most of the time, a demon will disobey your orders unless said order is something their personality makes them inclined to do, but if you give them enough gifts or command them to do enough things that they would have done anyway, they'll follow your orders without issue. Wild demons like attacking physically, sly demons like using offensive magic, kind demons like defending or supporting, smart demons like doing whatever's optimal, and dumb demons do whatever they feel like. Just like Magnetite, the mechanic looks like a hassle to deal with on paper, but Soul Hackers' execution makes it way too forgiving. Increases in loyalty are high enough that a demon will more often than not reach its max loyalty level in the dungeon you get it in. The exception is smart demons, but I find that because they're specifically programmed to go for what's optimal, they never really give me any trouble, to the point where one of the demons I used in my party for the final dungeon/boss was a smart demon that hadn't reached level 5 loyalty yet. Also, there's apparently a chance for demons to disobey you even if they're at max loyalty, but I never got it a single time over the course of the 40 hours I spent on this game, so it must not be that common. If you can deal with other Megaton moments, it shouldn't be that much of an issue. Moving on to how dungeon crawling is handled, it's done in first person, and the game does a good job at using puzzles and other tricks to make each dungeon stand out. The problem is that some of these puzzles aren't very good. Notable stinkers include one where you have to repeatedly backtrack to talk to 4 NPCs over and over, one where you have to move precisely to make sure you don't have to fall below, and the VR Haunted Mansion, which was my personal breaking point. This is where the 3DS version becomes a godsend, both because the bottom screen inherently makes the map easier to visualize and because there's a switch you can turn on that lets you automatically see the layout of a dungeon without having to map it yourself. Adding insult to injury though is a high encounter rate and the abundance of enemies with status ailments, insta-kills or both, after a certain point. Still, I wouldn't say the bad of Soul Hackers' dungeons outweighs the good. The VR Art Museum has plenty of clever puzzles minus the aforementioned backtracking. The 3 parts where you take control of another character are all really cool, and without giving anything away, the optional Primate Intelligence Lab is an extremely funny joke at the player's expense. So overall, gameplay-wise, Soul Hackers is generally solid but nothing special, and I'd say the writing is in a similar tier of quality. The game takes place in Amami City, a cyberpunk sort of setting where a virtual world was just launched and every house was given a computer for free. As is the norm of the genre, this isn't as good as it seems. The mysterious Phantom Society is using this virtual world and the corporation that runs it to steal people's souls, and the player character is part of a small group of amateur hackers called the Spookies that aims to thwart this Phantom Society's plans. Uncovering how these plans exactly work and dealing with the Phantom Society's attempts to stop you from doing so makes for a pretty good plot. Amami City as a setting is one of the game's biggest strengths, as it's interesting to see how a relatively grounded town was affected by the recent introduction of various technologies. One of my favorite details about it is how a lot of the stores you use are behind front, selling the idea of your character being an underground hacker. But there are plenty of similar details throughout the game that also do a lot to make Amami City feel so alive. Moving on to the supporting cast of hackers you work with, they're fine, although some of them could have definitely been given more to do. I mostly agree with the common opinion among Megaton fans that the Spookies' group dynamics need to be fleshed out more. Although I'll throw in the caveat that if you think the Persona 4 cast feels like a real friend group, you're objectively not allowed to say the Spookies don't feel like one. Within the group, there's 2 clear highlights. Spooky, the mature leader of the group, and Nemissa, a demon possessing the protagonist's childhood friend. Nemissa in particular is just a fun character to be around, and also has the most defined character arc, starting out as completely selfish but eventually learning to do genuine good. Also, a lot of cishet weirdos who unironically use the word waifu describe her as that, but I don't see why they think they'd have a chance with her if she was real. She literally spends most of the game in another woman's body. But if there's one issue I have with the plot, and a general warning I give before recommending Soul Hackers, it's Atlus being Atlus when it comes to the handling of marginalized groups. There's a fair bit of things in the game that aren't the best look, but the one that's the most ingrained in the main plot is its incorporation of indigenous beliefs. It takes heavy inspiration from depictions of indigenous peoples in American film/entertainment in general, which don't have the best track record. A major entity in the plot is based on the Algonquin belief of the Manitou, another important character named Kinop is an indigenous person, and the aforementioned parts where you control other characters are called vision quests. To my knowledge though, the last of those 3 is nothing like the actual historical practice, and it's very much yet another case of RPGs using the name of a religious concept for the sole reason that it sounds cool. I could 100% see there being potential issues with stuff like stereotyping and appropriation, but I can't find much writings on this game from actual indigenous people. So I'm not going to go into extensive detail, as I would risk putting words in the mouths of people with lived experiences that I don't have. However, there's one aspect of the game's incorporation of indigenous culture that is so obviously bad that it alone is enough to make me skeptical of everything else. Hinap's name in the Japanese version is this, which is undeniably one of the worst things you can name an indigenous character. And sure, it's good that it was changed in localization, but let's not use that as a reason to ignore how the original release named him that. Since I've learned from saying slightly negative things about Persona 4 a non-zero amount of times that some Megaton fans can be real assets when it comes to this stuff, let me make this clear. I still like this game, as evidenced by the fact that you're literally watching a video about why that is. But that doesn't mean I'm going to overlook its issues, be it questionable gameplay decisions or something more serious like a character's Washington DC football team core name. If you want to shut down any serious discussion about a game, then that is quite frankly more disrespectful to it as a work of art than anything I could ever say in said serious discussion. Hey, did you know that this guy's name is literally Masahiro Sakurai? Pretty wacky, lol. I have no clue how to segue between points, by the way. While both the gameplay and the moment-to-moment narrative are good, the gameplay isn't necessarily anything to write home about on its own, and the story has a massive caveat attached to it. Is this really just some slightly above average RPG that I inexplicably decided to make a video about despite not having anything particularly interesting to say about it? Is Atlus a hack fraud studio riding off the success of the only good game they will ever make, My World My Way, for the Nintendo DS? Well, the answer to that second one is objectively yes, but in regards to the first one, there's an aspect of Soul Hackers that makes it something truly special.
My network, it was meant to be a place for people to communicate, to bring the world together. But look at the reality. It simply digitized the dark side of man, filled minds with lies. It caused the psychological decline of culture that denies the very existence of truth. And in the end, it even became a weapon to take people's lives. I didn't mean any of this.
There's this feeling of uneasiness conveyed throughout Soul Hackers' presentation. Amami City's color scheme paints it as unnatural, with a sky that's an unusual purple, most likely due to the abundance of artificial whites everywhere else. The sprites of demons and characters alike feel distant. The soundtrack, by far one of the game's greatest strengths, creates a compelling atmosphere. Mysterious. Foreboding. Dreamlike. But above all else, uncertain. It should be no secret where the root of this uneasiness is. Soul Hackers was very clearly inspired by the release of Windows 95 and the massive increase in internet users that it caused as a result. One of the main antagonists has a Japanese word for gate in his name. You couldn't possibly make this any less subtle. As you can probably tell, the game's depiction of a future dominated by the internet is admittedly far from the truth at points. The real-life internet has been around for a while now, and last time I checked, we still have yet to see electronic summonings of demons, child abducting dolphins, and Bill Gates enacting a cartoonishly evil plan to steal everyone's souls. In the case of that last one, it's wrong because the real-life Bill Gates is even more cartoonishly evil. But some of Soul Hackers' predictions are less outlandish. It delves into what happens when using the internet for escapism reaches an unhealthy degree. There's a throwaway conversation in the VR Haunted Mansion that seems to have predicted the more exploitative side of online true crime. The general idea of governments and corporations using the internet for nefarious purposes is obviously true. And it's easy to find parallels between the speech from Katakura that I played earlier and any number of present-day social media websites. This isn't to say that Soul Hackers is some uniquely skilled entity when it comes to making predictions, like what stupid people think The Simpsons is. I'm obviously cherry-picking here, and many of the predictions that the game got right are either just coincidental or broad enough that it's easy to compare to multiple things. However, that's exactly what makes Soul Hackers so fun to look at. It represents a time where a massive part of society that most of us take for granted now was just being introduced. And specifically, it's a time capsule for what a lot of the initial concerns about it were. Some of those concerns ended up having a point. Others, not so much. And it's interesting to look at from the perspective of someone from the future that it supposedly takes place in. I guess to wrap this up in one last sentence, what makes Soul Hackers special is how much it nails the vibe of what people in the 90s thought the internet was going to be like. Miscellaneous footnotes that I didn't have time to fit in the video proper. Kazuma Kanako's art is obviously really good, at least when he's not doing NFTs. My favorite music track in the game is 2D Field for how weirdly optimistic it sounds, as a sort of calm before the storm of most dungeon themes. I love the battle UI and in particular the bounce effects for how dynamic they make everything feel. The best boss fights in the game are the ones where you fight other devil summoners and have to think about which targets to prioritize as well as how to best utilize the front row back row system. And most importantly, Recently, the Spookies absolutely have the energy of a Discord server. This one's the moderator, this one posts every unfiltered thought into #general, and this one gets bullied for listening to Weezer.